Possibly the easiest vegetable to grow on the entire planet may be Jerusalem artichokes. Today we'll make some fermented Jerusalem artichoke pickles. Very easy. The plants resemble small flowering sunflower, and that's because that's what they are. They're a member of the sunflower family. Ours got 10 feet tall last summer. They're huge. The plants are, but the flowers are about as big as the palm of my hand. Still, there are hundreds of them, and they're lovely. Those photos are from late last summer. Then all winter, you can harvest the roots and eat them. We normally boil and mash them along with some onions, as I showed you how to do in this movie. Sometimes we mix them with purple sweet potatoes, which is delicious. Where we garden, on the borderline between zone 7B and 8A, we need to finish harvesting by mid-March. That's because the tubers left in the ground will start to sprout. It's their growing time and they're perennials. But doing some cleanup on March 26th, I unearthed a bunch of them that were in the way. And you hate to waste good garden produce, so we thought of trying fermented pickles. When cooking with Jerusalem artichokes, you really have to scrub because they do collect dirt in the little undulations and crevices. And I had to scrub even more because these had begun sprouting little root hairs. This batch has more of this sort of thing, which I pared off, than the midwinter batches. It's also best to trim off any areas that look like this. We just want the good, clean, white flesh of the root to pickle. Cut those nice, crispy pieces of white root small enough to pack easily into jars. Then create the brine by adding 2 tablespoons of salt for every 1 quart of water. There's more than one school of thought on the specifics. I like to bring it to a boil to make sure it's thoroughly mixed, then let it cool enough to pour into the jars on top of the vegetables. For fermenting pickles to work right and to avoid any slimy, nasty stuff, you have to weight the pickles down so that they stay below the level of the brine. Fermentation weights are one way to do it. Mine came from Amazon. They're not difficult to find or expensive. There is such a thing as a fermentation lock that you can use, but I find that simply screwing on the jar lids, but not all that tightly, allows the bubbles that will form to escape and prevent the jars from exploding or something like that, but doesn't let gases back into the pickling process. That's because the fermentation that's occurring is creating outward pressure. It can't go backwards. This is 5 days after the pickles were packed into jars, and every single jar is bubbling nicely. The presence of these bubbles is evidence that fermentation occurred as planned. The point at which you dine on the pickles is now open to personal taste. I tend to prefer them right about now, as soon as the brining and fermentation process is finished. They get tartar and saltier as time goes on, and some people prefer them later. The brine is pretty salty, so we rinse the pickles and let them drain before serving them, and they make a delicious part of lunch. You may notice that my liquid is a little bit cloudy. That's because I used non-iodized table salt, which does work, but I will get prettier results when my canning and pickling salt arrives. The fermentation process is creating lactic and acetic acid, and that's why the preservation works. But most sources do suggest storing the pickles in a cool place if you keep them long. If you want to read more about fermentation and food safety, the University of Minnesota Extension Service has a comprehensive article online, and I think we can trust that they are backed up by good food science. I found it by going to the homepage, putting fermented pickles in the search box. This article came up, and this is not the only extension service that has material on fermented pickles. I just think theirs is an especially good one, and they also have articles on closely related subjects.